Shana Tova Murechet. Hope everybody had a great Rosh Hashanah. Hope everybody's written for their book of life, book of Parnasat Tova. It's so amazing. Every time the Chazan goes to the Sha'arei Ora, Sha'arei Baracha, Sha'arei Gila, all the Aleph Bet goes according to the order of the Aleph Bet. When it gets to Parnasat Tova, he slows down, takes a breath. Sha'arei Parnasat Tova, and everybody, oh man. That one also, yeah. Some people, it depends on the crowd, but when he goes Sha'arei Torah, Limud Torah, learning Torah, people give a good amen also. Anyway, all the good gates should be open, Baruch Hashem. Thank you, Rabbi. Soon by you. Okay. We are starting the new part of the book. By the way, it's good because, I'm excited to do this now, more so, because a few people came up to me. Remember that there was in our community, there's a big Brit Milah on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. There was a Brit Milah in Rabbi Nasir of Shul, and people from all over came. It's actually an interesting halakha. What happens if a Brit Milah falls on Rosh Hashanah? Really, ideally, if the person who's doing the Brit Milah, the Mohel, is going to blow the shofar, he should do the Brit Milah before the Musaf, the Shulchan Aruch rules, and he should have some of his blood on his mouth when he blows the shofar. Not for the squeamish. But it's. You understand why though? But it creates an amazing tikkun in Shamayim. A lot of reasons. Kafachim brings down the reason is because you want to first go into the Brit of Avraham, which is the Brit Milah, the covenant of Avraham, and then you go to the covenant of Yitzchak, which is the shofar, or the tikkun of Yitzchak, I should say. So it's really an amazing thing. But we weren't able to do that. We had to do the Brit Milah after Musaf. And over there, somebody came up to me. Why am I telling the story? Someone said, "Listen, I love your story. I love your videos about Titus and the mosquito." And I'm like, "Wow, okay, somebody's actually listening to this." So that's why we went ahead. That's why I'm excited to go on further. Baruch Hashem. We're on chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a famous story, Masechet Gittin, about Onkelos. Who is Onkelos? We'll explain who he was, and it's tied into the theme of the previous chapter actually a little bit, because Titus, who was the main character of the previous chapter, when the Gemara talks about everything that happened to Titus, the Roman general, the Roman king, who destroyed the second temple, and how God utterly punished him and destroyed him, and how he died, he actually makes another appearance in this story. How? You're about to see. It's a very long, this section right here, chapter 11, is really one of the fundamental pieces of the entire book. It's a huge chapter, it has 4 sections, a lot of unique ideas, philosophical and fundamental Torah ideas that we talk about. We're going to try to build it up, Be'ezat Hashem, in a good, understandable way, and it's all structured around this famous story in the Gemara Masechet Gittin, page 56b, on to 57a. Section 1 of chapter 11, we called it proportional potential. A little alliteration there. Proportional potential, and that'll make sense hopefully by the end of this series of this section 1. Here is the story. I'm going to read it in English. We're on page 153. Onkelos bar Kelonikos. His father's name was Kelonikos. This doesn't sound like a very Jewish name, that's because it's not. He was Roman, some say Greek, of that lineage. Sounds very Greek, but he was related to Titus. How? The Gemara says, the son of Titus' sister. What does that make him? Titus' nephew. Onkelos was Titus' nephew. Yes, I'm talking about the Onkelos that you see inside all your Chumash. You see the little, Targum Onkelos, the translation in Aramaic, the famous Aramaic translation of the Chumash of the Torah, was written by this Onkelos. He was not born a Jew. He was a convert. How did he convert? A lot of famous stories about how he converted, what he did after he converted, but this is a story of how he actually converted. So, the son of Titus' sister, he wanted to convert to Judaism, says the Gemara. What did he do? He went and he summoned Titus, Titus' uncle, through kishuf, necromancy as they translate in English, which means witchcraft. He did a certain witchcraft, and he summoned the soul of his dead uncle Titus to ask him this question. Onkelos said, now whether or not he did it himself or he went to a special witch who would do it, that's open to interpretation. The Gemara doesn't say straight out. Some say one way, some say the other way, that he went to a special witch who did it. Who knew, it was very common back then. So even nowadays, some people do that. Still common. So now Onkelos said to Titus, his uncle, once his soul was summoned through the witch, he asked him, who is important in that world where you are now? But in Olam Haba, who is considered important? Titus said to him, Israel, the nation of Israel. It's obvious. Once you look over there, that becomes obvious that it's all about God, the Torah, and Israel. That's what the world is for. So, Onkelos asked him, what if I attach myself to them? That's the language he used. Meaning, what if I convert to their ranks, to their nation? Titus said to him, Milayhu, which means their words, also means their matters, their dealings, their things, their stuff that they have to do, are numerous. It's a lot. And you will not be able to fulfill them. Not easy being Jewish. Right? Like you always say. This guy right here, he always says that. Instead, what did Titus tell him to do? Go out and do battle with them. Make them your enemy. And you will become the head. You will become prominent. You will become great in this world. As it is written, it says in Eicha, the book of Eicha, Lamentations, which is English, her adversaries become her head. Who is she in this verse? Look at note number 3. It's goes on the next page. 3 is referring to the fallen city of Jerusalem, because Eicha is talking about the destruction of Yerushalayim. So it says, her adversaries, whoever makes Jerusalem and Israel and Jews their enemy, they become the head. Which we see is obvious nowadays in politics. The most famous stories are the Arab-Israeli conflict. Anybody who makes Israel an enemy becomes famous, right? That just is, the history of modern history and the history of the world wars. It's all there. This pasuk, her adversaries become her head, which means anyone who distresses Israel becomes a head, becomes a leader, prominent figure. Onkelos said to him now, says to his uncle again, what is the judgment of that man in that world that you are in? So when he says that man, he's talking in third person, talking about him himself, meaning he's asking his uncle, what is your punishment? What are you dealing with there in heaven or hell, wherever he is? Titus said to him, it is, the punishment is that which he sentenced upon himself, which means that which I said about myself, which was the topic of the previous section, chapter 10, section 6. Every day his ashes are gathered, and they judge him, and they burn him, and they scatter him over the 7 seas. Exactly what he told his servants to do to his body, because he thought he was going to run away from God. That's exactly the punishment, again, spiritually, in that mode in Olam Haba, that he experienced every day. Maybe he still does. Maybe he's still going through that decree now. There's a lot of notes on the bottom here. I'm just going to read some of them just to get some good background information on all of this. These notes go on to the next page. It's one of the rare pages in the book where it goes on to the next page. Note number 1. Onkelos was a Roman convert to Judaism around the time after the destruction of the Second Temple. His contributions to Judaism are immense, as he wrote the heavily acclaimed Targum Onkelos, like I told you guys, right? Which is printed in virtually every Chumash until the present day, nowadays. It is an essential part of the mitzvah of Shnaim Mikra V'Hatargum, right? The mitzvah that you have to read the parsha of that week. You have to prepare it twice in the regular, in the Hebrew, and once in the Targum Onkelos. That's an actual mitzvah in the Gemara, in the Halakha, Shulchan Aruch, chapter Resh Pei Hey, where he goes into all of that, the laws of that very, very important mitzvah. It guarantees long life. Look into that. But he's an essential part of that mitzvah. I mean, anyone who does this mitzvah every week, some people break it up every day. They break up the 7 parts of the Torah into every day of the week to make it easier instead of doing everything in one shot. So they experience Onkelos every day, people who read this. So Onkelos is a part of basically daily Jewish life, religious Jewish life. In truth, due to historical discrepancies in the chronology of different events recorded in the Gemara, there is some dispute whether or not the Onkelos that we refer to here in our Gemara is the same Onkelos who wrote the Aramaic Torah. the Aramaic translation of the Torah. So there's some dispute. Some say it's a different Onkelos. The Maharatz Chayut suggests that the Roman convert to Judaism referred to in our Gemara was actually somebody else called Achilas, the convert, who was also called Onkelos sometimes. So there's some dispute. The rationale of the Maharatz Chayut is that we have on record that Onkelos, the convert, the main one that we're talking about, he mourned the death of Rabban Gamliel Hazaken, who lived at least 3 generations before the destruction of the Second Temple. So we're saying historically, this can't be the same person. Our Gemara, however, is said after the death of Titus, which is of course after the destruction of the Second Temple, because Titus destroyed the Second Temple. However, it's quite possible that Onkelos spoken of there could be Achilas, and the Onkelos here could be the right of the Aramaic translation, which means it's a machloket, and bottom line, we're going like the approach that says this Onkelos in our Gemara is the same Onkelos who wrote the Aramaic translation.
Even though the timeline doesn't match.
Well, meaning the other source where it says a certain Onkelos mourned the death of Rabban Gamliel Zaken, which was 3 generations before, that could have been the other Onkelos.
Got it.
You got it? So, okay. Good. Let's go skip down to note number 5, where we're talking about the punishment that Titus is experiencing in that world after he died, that his body gets burnt and dispersed. Says number 5, Titus is referring to himself saying, okay, see section 6 of the previous chapter, like we just said, where Titus commands that his body be burned upon his death, unwittingly sentencing himself for the punishment our Gemara describes here. It's important to understand that the Gemara's description of what transpires in that realm was not physical, only figurative. Maharal writes that, right? There's no physicality there. It's just described in physical terms in order for us to get some semblance of an idea, because that's all we can understand in this world so far. That realm operates by a different set of rules than physical existence, which by definition cannot be accurately understood by earthlings, like I just said, by earth beings. In Gemarot such as this, Chazal is forced to borrow a familiar language to describe unfamiliar concepts. Good. Now, let's go to Rashi. Rashi says, describing which witchcraft that he used, which method he used to speak to Titus. It was something called Ov. The Gemara calls it Ov. I'm sorry, the Torah calls it Ov. The Torah commands you're not allowed to do Ov. Ov and you don't need. Those are 2 different methods. What is Ov? Look at note 6 again on the next page. Ov is a type of witchcraft mentioned in the Torah in a few places over there, in which the person would summon the spirit of a dead person by tapping into impure powers. Okay, the voice of the spirit that they're calling would then communicate through the armpit of the summoner, of the witch. Yes, that's what it was, through the armpit. Why? I don't know. We have to look into that. Rashi explains that over there in the Torah. It was utilized to ask the spirit important questions about information that is revealed to them in the spiritual world, but may not be so obvious in the physical world. The Torah forbids this activity on pain of death. For a Jew to do Ov, it's asur on pain of death. God says famously in the Torah, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Be simple with God. Don't do all these trickeries and palm readings and future tellings and fortune, because they have to tap into impure sources to give you that information. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's perverted and it's wrong, meaning it's twisted, the knowledge. So the information they get, they might not know how to interpret it. Either way, you're not allowed to use them, because they are tapping into impure sources, which God forbids. He doesn't let you do that. Now again, why did God create that? Very simple, because God is testing you. God is testing you. Can you trust me? Can you go with me simply and trust me that everything is going to be okay? Or anything's going to happen for the best, no matter how it happens? Or do you want to get ahead of the curve and try to figure out future information, in an impure way that, again, the test has to be there. That's why it's available for us. But again, it's just like God. Why did God create pigs with that delicious meat? Same reason. I test you. Are you going to eat it or not? Well, people who eat it say it's delicious. I don't know how it tastes, but you get the point. Or not even that. Cheeseburgers, people say are delicious. I don't know. Why? Because it's a test. Everything's a test. Next, continuing in this note, the Torah. Okay. Whether or not such witchcraft still exists today is a topic of debate. Since the Torah, however, the ultimate pillar of truth, forbids such actions, then it definitely existed at some point in time, right? The Torah wouldn't forbid something that doesn't exist. So it definitely existed, or maybe even now. We find mention of Ov witchcraft being done in the book of Shmuel, Samuel 1, chapter 28, where King Shaul pursued a witch, to use Ov, right? King Shaul, Melech Shaul, he used Ov to summon the spirit of Shmuel the prophet, who had already died by that time. Why? Because he wanted to ask for advice about the impending war that he was about to face with the Philistines. He wanted to ask for advice about the war. Thus, even though this method requires access to impure powers, it can be used to summon not only wicked people, such as Titus in our Gemara, but it can even summon Shmuel the prophet. So,
I don't understand how that works in this case.
why?
We're forbidden to use it. And it's doing right.
Yes, it doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Wait,
It works.
no. How do you bring a tzaddik back to talk to you when a tzaddik is involved in the process, or the spirit of a tzaddik knowing that it's forbidden?
So you're saying, does that soul that's being called get damaged because it's forbidden? I don't know. For sure, the person who's alive was doing it gets damaged because he's transgressing an issur from the Torah, a big prohibition. But does the soul get damaged? I don't know. Good question.
How is it allowed to come? To prove that it's possible?
Because God created these dynamics where they can be pulled by these impure powers. Now, again, it doesn't mean that it's allowed. Like I said, it's for the test. But it works.
Well, if it's a test.
And when he called him, by the way, you should know, Shmuel says the famous language, La meher gazdani, why did you disturb me so badly? It's so, from the language itself, you have to say, yes, it is a disruptance. It is a damage to the soul being called.
Okay.
The summoner does not need to be in the location of the grave in order to summon the spirit via Ov, as is evident from the witch who summoned Shmuel, since Shmuel was buried in Ramah, far away, and she, the witch, was at another location. We find this as well in the coming events sections of our chapter, when Onkelos, who's located in Roman Empire, is going to call someone else called Bilam, which is in section 2, as you'll see, who was buried in present-day Medina, way far away. So bottom line is, you don't have to be...
buried in Medina?
That's what the Ben Yehoiada says, yeah. Medina is like a Persia area.
No.
No?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia,
This is the holiest
Middle East, further out.
No, it's the holiest of the holy.
The city of Medina you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the actual city. Maybe it is the actual city of Medina.
It has to be. There's no
Perhaps.
other Medina.
It could be.
Unless there's in Texas. Then there is.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's all the notes. Let's go back to Rashi. Rashi says one more thing. So when Titus said that he was suffering that which he decreed upon himself, this refers to the burning and scattering of his ashes, like we said. Okay. Good. Beautiful. Now we have to ask some questions. Any questions on this Gemara so far? By the way, this Gemara is just the beginning piece. This is a unique chapter because this Gemara has 3 parts. Because Onkelos is going to summon 3 people and ask 3 people the question. The first one is Titus. Second one is you'll see it, I don't want to give it away. Third one is another person, you'll see it, I don't want to give it away. And then in the 4th section of this chapter, we're going to reiterate the entire Gemara all together, all 3 pieces, all 3 people that he calls, and ask very analytical questions on that. So first we're going to break down part A, B, and C, and then A, B, C together. Now we're in part A.
I haven't seen you so excited in a while.
Yeah? You know why? Because I haven't had a learning session with people in a while. I need Torah.
Very, very good. Go.
Yeah, I'm not even feeling so good, but we're good. Okay. Sha'ar Chatzar, questions. Who was Onkelos? We answered that more or less. And why did our Gemara underscore his nephew-uncle relationship with Titus? Which means, why do I care that he was the nephew of Titus? Not only that, why do I care that he's the son of Titus' sister? Do I care if he's son of his brother, son of his sister? Why do I care? Tell me he's his nephew.
To put things simply, Rome was the most decadent place. So when you have somebody that lived that life and chose Torah, that is a very big deal.
Fine, so just say nephew.
No.
Why are you telling? Just say Ben Dod.
This is the man that destroyed.
It's a cousin.
His
Why are you telling me the
one
daughter,
that
the son of his sister? I'm sorry.
destroyed Jerusalem.
Yes, Titus destroyed Jerusalem.
Okay, so midah keneged midah. You take his family, and his family is the witness.
So you're saying the Gemara is trying to show you how even someone whose family is so far away, someone from there can come back and be a huge gem in Torah society.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. Next question. What is the depth behind Titus's answer to Onkelos' question? Right? What did he say to him? Why did he accuse Onkelos of being unable to uphold the commandments of the Torah? Titus said, Torah is too much, too many mitzvot, too hard, don't do it. You won't be able to do it. Why?
Because he was looking at him as a Roman. They're not used to this kind of things. That's a special kind of discipline. They're used to army discipline. They're not used to personal discipline.
Oh, this guy, the coffee sometimes boosts your neurons and they just shoot. They're firing very good answers. Is it good what?
I think you read the book.
No, I didn't read this one. We did read parts with him, not this one. So I'm not going to say his name, but this fine gentleman here answers. What was the answer again? He said that the Titus looked at his nephew Onkelos as a Roman, and Romans are used to certain type of discipline, like in the military, but not Judaism, Torah type of discipline, which requires you to be critical with yourself and your self-development, and it's very, very difficult. Yes, sacrificing your love and desires for things beyond the Creator. Yes, like the sake of the Creator, God, is something Romans were not used to. Okay, fine. Why is it that all who cause suffering to Israel gain a lofty head-like status in the world? That's true, right? Why is that so?
I'll tell you why.
Right? Titus made that mention.
Before they fall, they become famous. And the more famous they become, the harder they fall. We can see all these civilizations that came and went, disappeared.
Right.
Those that tried to take the Jews on, whether the Persians and so on.
Their names are etched in history.
But they are just, just somewhere a footnote of history now.
Mm-hmm. But the main ones are not the footnote, right? The Nazis, for example.
Footnote.
They're a footnote now?
They're a footnote now. It's the same.
What do you mean by footnote?
They don't exist. They don't exist as they were.
Right, but I'm saying I hear you. But they owned a huge.
They promised 1,000-year Reich that they were going to last for 1,000 years.
It wasn't that
long.
They
lasted
30, 40, 10, 15? No, they came to power in 33, no?
Correct.
How do I know that? Actually, I learned too much about World War II because of you. World War II is such a fascinating time in history.
Fascinating, but they were over as a country or as an entity in 1945.
45 after the war.
Okay, they're still hiding out. There's still a lot of them,
but they did so much in those 12 years. It's insane.
Unbelievable. The amount what they have achieved, and that's a discipline, the Roman discipline. As an army, they're very disciplined. But they do it for different reasons.
Okay, but the end of be that as it may, during those 12 years, we're taking the Nazis as an example now. During those 12 years, they more or less were on the front page of everything.
Absolutely.
In those 12 years.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's exactly what Titus said. You want to be rich and famous? You want to have everyone know you ought to be ahead? Go against the Jews. For a short time, you will be up there, but eventually before God destroys you.
But there's the next question.
Yes.
Why is it so? Because
so that's our question. Why is that true?
Because Hashem made it so.
Yes.
He always shows us. You want to be like them. You copy them. Then they
meaning God is showing us that a lesson. Correct. That all these enemies of yours, look how great they become. Just as high they climb, the harder they fall eventually.
You want to be like them.
You shouldn't want to be like them.
No,
okay.
No. You want to be like them, and I'll show you. They will turn on you. They will destroy you. We went through destruction so many times.
Yeah.
In the end, Hashem always saves us. But we always veer off. Always off.
It's a reminder, basically.
Absolutely.
God has to smack us in the head sometimes. Know
hate,
who you are.
This hate, the constant hate of the Jews, that is irrational. It's irrational.
Yeah.
The only way you can explain it is Hashem.
It's coming from God. God
wants it that way because
it says it straight.
We get warm, we take off our Jewish clothes.
You get too comfortable.
Going.
It's a famous pasuk in the Torah. It talks about the goyim. God will send the goyim against you. It doesn't say for any reason, but I mean, if you don't listen to God, God will turn the goyim against you.
I just read a couple of weeks.
And it says if you are going to be listening to God, then the Jewish people are going to run after. It says 1,000 will run after 10,000. Elef dofu. 1,000 meaning 10,000 goyim will be running away from 1,000 squadron group of Jews from the fear. But if you don't follow God, it's the other way around.
You're going to run from nothing, but you're going to constantly run. You'll be always fearful.
Yeah. Okay. Next.
Because it's going to be the biggest power taken on Israel. Israel's not going to be pushed around by us.
Exactly. That is actually one of the reasons that we're going to say later. But can I say your name? Yes. Danny over here, my good, amazing, longtime friend Danny, says, Daniel I should say. The answer is because whenever any nation goes against the Jewish people, God has to raise that nation up in order to indirectly raised up the Jewish people. Because the greater the enemy of a person is, the greater you are.
Yeah,
right?
If you survive.
Exactly. Not only, of course, if you survive as well, but you know, if some random small group of people came up and were not important, came up and made enemies against Jewish people and were successful to a degree, then the Jewish people would be like, oh, they're pushovers, they're nothing, they're nobodies. They got beat by them. But when it's somebody great and awesome,
Absolutely. Like Egypt.
beats them, then it's then Israel itself is also pushed up to be on par with them. Okay, next question. Why was Titus's punishment in the upper realm the same as what he commanded his attendants to do to his body upon his death? Why is he burned to ashes and then reconstituted every day, rebuilt? What does that mean? What's the depth behind that? How are we to understand this punishment? What is the depth? Okay, good.
Well, in the last chapter when we talked about it,
Yeah,
we said the reason why he decreed that upon himself.
he was trying to run away from God.
He was trying to run away and saying
Yes.
that he will not be punished afterlife. Right?
Yes. Well,
Here he is being proven every day of his life or the afterlife that you can't run away from God,
exactly.
and by being dispersed all in 7 bodies of water,
7 seas.
7 seas,
Yeah.
he still reconstituted to become the same Titus, to be destroyed again
Right.
and again and again.
The reconstitution is the interesting part because that's what he was
That's
trying
what
to. He was trying to avoid.
Yes.
But God shows you.
No problem.
I can do it in a second, and then exactly. So we'll go into that. B'ezrat Hashem. So let's do a couple commentaries before we call it a day here. Ben Yehoyada, this is the Ben Ish Chai's famous commentary on the Gemara. He says, despite the final instruction Titus gave to cremate his body and spread the ashes among the 7 seas, it must be at least a minute amount of ash from his body remained at the place where it was burnt, upon which the impure spiritual energy rested, which Onkelos used to communicate with Titus' spirit. Which means what he's saying indirectly here is that you can't do Ov without any semblance of a body remaining, because there's some spiritual entity that's being tapped into by the witch through the Ov system in order to communicate. So he's saying there must have been some ash left there.
What about that piece? You know that they say doesn't get disintegrated.
The loose bone, yeah. So Kabbalistically, that's the bone that doesn't. Yeah, it's a tiny bone at the top of your vertebrae here. I believe it's the atlas. If you want to be technical, it's the atlas, which is this first one, C1, right? C1 or C2. It's one of those. Like you have a little bony bump there.
What we're talking about is.
But yeah, that's the bone that we say doesn't get.
This was burning. Burning should have burnt it.
Right. So therefore, that's what the Ben Yehoyada says. There must have been something left. Let's see over here on page 3. I'm sorry, note number 3. There must be something remaining of the person in this world for the summoner to latch onto to summon their spirit through Ov. Usually this is the grave of the person, but Titus had no grave since he was cremated. That's what Ben Yehoyada chose to conclude, that there must be some ash from Titus' body that remained in the world for Onkelos to have summoned Titus' spirit via Ov. Okay. Next thing he says is the reason that the ones who make Israel suffer become Rosh, Resh, Aleph, Shin is Rosh. They become the head, that's the term Titus used. The reason is because they take control over the letters Resh, Aleph, and Shin that exist in the name Yisrael. Israel, Yisrael have Resh, Aleph, and Shin in there. And whatever that means. Let's see the note number 4. We tried to explain that. Note number 4. We tried to explain. Perhaps the Ben Yehoyada means the following. When Israel is preoccupied and focused on themselves and not enough on their responsibility to be a light unto the nations, they are essentially ignoring their leadership in the world. Right? They're ignoring their leadership role that they're supposed to have in the world. So when the other nations overtake that role at their expense, that's what happens. They take control of the letters that spell Rosh, spell head, Resh, Aleph, and Shin, that exist within the word Yisrael, leaving behind only the letters, right? If you take Yisrael, you take out Rosh, Resh, Aleph, and Shin from that word, which the word Jews are supposed to be. They're supposed to be the Rosh. They're supposed to be the light of the nations. But if they're not acting like that, you remove that. The Goyim take over that power. What's left in the word Yisrael after you subtract those 3 letters? Yud, Lamed, which is Li. which means for me, hinting at the reason for this consequence, that Israel was too focused on itself
Too selfish.
and not its spiritual influence on the world, as God had intended.
On itself as a nation or itself individually.
You could do either.
Both. Either or. The bottom line is, it's a famous verse in Isaiah, I don't know it by heart, but it says over there that they're supposed to be or lagoim, a light unto the nations. That is a very essential, role that we have, and a way. And I'll be honest with you, there's Chatzar Yosef against it. For example, especially a lot of us we work in in the world, and we have a lot of goy co-workers. Correct. That's really one of our great opportunities to be a light unto the nations, to do Jewish things, and to not be ashamed to do Jewish things around them. And let them question, let them say, why do you do that? Explain, this is why. Because God told, give them a good, a motivating reason to understand that because there's really nothing in Judaism that doesn't make sense once you explain it. Something about the truth of the Torah sparks, and even a non-Jewish person will say, wow, it makes sense, that's amazing, I respect that.
When you explain it not in the right way, you do a lot more damage.
Of course, you have to
be knowledgeable enough.
You have to have the skill to explain at the same time. My point is that if you are at work and you're embarrassed to do Jewish things, say a bracha on food, for example, or things like that, like during lunch, we're squandering that opportunity of being a light unto the nation. If you don't look like a Jew, if you don't wear a kippah, and you identify with your Jewish status, and even without that, once you have a kippah on and is going around you, you have to act a little different. You're being watched. Because whether they tell you or not, they're judging you. Look at this guy, this Jew. What does he think so special? He has a little beard over there, his little kippah. What do you think he's doing? He's being so nice, he's being so polite. What's he trying to do? Honestly?
I'm going to mention a friend of ours without mentioning the name. I went to his office.
Uh-huh.
He happens to work in a very Muslim area.
Okay.
And he wears a kippah. And that's every time that he's there, and I got to give him a lot of credit for that.
Is he respected by them?
Yes, he is respected. He tells me, they always tell him shalom.
There you go.
But
does he tell them assalamu alaikum?
I don't know if he knows that. I would.
Is it Ashkenazi?
He's a very good friend.
And my good friend. Okay. So at the end of the day, it's really an important opportunity. Of course, it requires us, it makes us think twice before we act also, and to be a little bit more careful. And that's the opportunity to fulfill this important role that we have as Am Yisrael, to be the real leaders. I mean, once Mashiach comes, it's going to be obvious. God's going to make it obvious that Am Yisrael is a chosen nation. They are the leaders, and all the Jews, all the non-Jews people that remain in that era in time are going to love it and appreciate it and see it. But while we're still before that time, we have to do our best to fulfill that role of being the leaders. Last thing here, let's do Benayahu to close up the Ben Ish Chai commentary, and that's all. We're on page 154 on top. Benayahu, it's also the Ben Ish Chai in a different book. Even though Titus commanded to have his body cremated and spread throughout the 7 seas, it must be that they disobeyed his instruction to cremate him and buried his body instead in order to preserve his honor. So remember, this is the same author, Ben Yosef Chaim, who in 2 different books is giving contradicting answers. Stira. In the first book, Ben Yehuda, he said that some ash was remaining, that his body was actually cremated, some ash was remaining, and that's how he could do ov and tap into his body, into his soul. In the second book, the Benayahu, he's saying, no, it must be that they didn't cremate him. It wasn't fitting for a king to be cremated, and they just buried him, and that's how he did ov.
What wasn't fitting is not to follow the direction of the king. So but
at the same time, it's sort of the reason which king do you know that got cremated?
Indians.
Roman king. Not many.
I don't know. I don't know of one, but that's not the point. The point here, I believe the author takes 2 paths, because maybe later on he found out what is required to do ov.
So you're saying he changed his mind?
When he found out what is required, how much they need.
We're going to talk about that in the beginning of the Chatzar Yosef.
I didn't know that.
We'll get there. Okay, so let's finish off this Benayahu. When a Jew dies, he says, a fraction of his soul remains hovering over the grave. This is what is tapped into when using ov to communicate with them. However, when a wicked non-Jewish person dies, like Titus, his soul is fully purged in Gehinnom? If so, why did Onkelos use Ov to communicate? I'm sorry, not why. How? How did Onkelos use Ov to communicate with Titus? If we're saying he was a Rasha and his whole soul went to Gehinnom, there's nothing left to tap into, how did he communicate with him?
I think that's your supposition here.
So let's see over here. Rather, it must be, he says, that whenever someone clings to idolatry, idol worship, Avodah Zarah, a certain general ruach tum'ah, which means impure spirit, remains over his grave, allowing for communication with them by Ov through that. That's how he explains it. This impure spirit remains over his grave until the time comes. Until the time comes for him to be eliminated, as it is stated, as it says, and I shall remove the impure spirit from the land. That's a pasuk in Zechariah, meaning that that's a prophecy about the time of Mashiach, when this impure spirit is going to be completely removed. So until that time, there's this, whoever did Avodah Zarah, a certain spiritual blemish of dirt remains there over their graves. And this, right, so the verse says from the land, from the earth, precisely referring to the graves of idol worshippers where the impure spirit resides. In their lifetime, their bodies clung to the impurity of idolatry, and as their bodies disintegrate in the grave and transform into the dust of the earth at their gravesite, the impurity remains there and hovers over it. That's how he explains that. Okay. Beseder. Stop there?
Yeah.
Maharsha. So B'ezrat Hashem next week is going to be actually between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and a lot of us are going to be building Sukkot. So I don't know if we're going to do this next week. If not, during Sukkot, Chol HaMoed, I will be down. I will be glad to do this if you guys will join me. We'll see. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.